My viewpoint on the church, still to this day, is somewhat morbid compared to most believers. And I had always put myself in this box as like I'm too rough around the edges to love Jesus. Like, if he is real, if I should follow him, he wouldn't even want me because I'm not perfect. I found Jesus working with other warriors, believers. Right? When I went to work with my dad at the cattle company we worked at, watching him day in and day out do good things, make mistakes, the way he reacted when he was angry, all of these things showed me that I was okay, that I wasn't just a total piece of junk. For my determined purpose is that I may know him, that I may progressively become more deeply and intimately acquainted with him, perceiving and recognizing and understanding the wonders of his person more strongly and clearly, and that I may in that same way come to know the power outflowing from his resurrection, which it exerts over believers, and that I may so share his sufferings as to be continually transformed in spirit into his likeness, even to his death. That was Philippians 3:10. We named our company 310 Ranch Life 8 years ago after that verse. And that verse for us gives us our purpose. Our purpose is to know him and share in his sufferings. Welcome to the Art of Suffering podcast with Dalton Darnell. I've had a really good friend of mine telling me for the last 5 years that we should do a podcast, or I should do a podcast. And I've always been super reluctant just because I don't know very much. I really don't. And I've kind of come to a point in my life where I feel like my experiences, not only cowboying, but in life, in illness, in my family, that I have some things to share with you guys. And I think there's a lot of guys out there who would also love to share and help people along the way. And I think we always end up on an island with our suffering in a way that we can't really help one another. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I enjoy podcasts. The Wild Courage podcast, Jocko Willink. I love those guys. And I really like listening to them and the stories that their guests tell. And I think we can do the same here. So in this first episode, I kind of want to walk you through what my expectations are for the podcast, what my hope is to bring to the table for you guys, and kind of share my story a little bit. I want to share my story. I want to share other people's stories on here. So we can be united in our suffering, because there's not a guy out there, a gal out there that isn't suffering in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So I think it's very important for us to not live on an island, so to speak, to where we can really band together in our suffering and our transformation in order to be more Christ-like. So I'm going to kind of walk you through in this first episode a little bit of my background, a little bit of what I've experienced. My road to Christ was not your typical one, and I think not your typical as far as what you would hear in church, so to speak. So I think there's a lot of guys out there like me that have experienced Christ in this way and not necessarily surrounded by church people, and I think it's a cool one. So let's just start there. My viewpoint on the church, still to this day, is somewhat morbid compared to most believers. I've always had a really hard time with the church. Reason being is it seems like lots of pastors or preachers or anybody who's leading a congregation is going to preach on specific things for specific reasons. And it never really resonated with me to feeling like real life, right? There was always some nuggets in there you could take into your life and try to apply, but it was always this abstract idea or abstract principle that it kind of fell to you to walk into life with. And I've always kind of had a hard time with that. Not to mention the way that Christians treat other Christians. I don't understand judgment. I don't understand judging other people or being critical of other people, because for me, the Bible is very clear on what we're supposed to do. And so I always had a really hard time when other believers would be critical of believers or even non-believers. And so that always kind of pushed me away. Little background, my granddad was a pastor, and I loved him. He was a very open and honest man. He was not judgmental in any way, shape, form, or fashion. He was very personable with me, and really, I credit a lot of me knowing Christ to him. But I also walked life with him, right? This wasn't me sitting in a pew listening to somebody read passages from the Bible. This was my grandfather, someone I loved and respected and spent quite a bit of time with. My dad was kind of the same way. While he did have his past, he was a huge influence on me becoming a believer. The same with my mother. She is an absolute powerhouse when it comes to teaching people how to be good people. And I was very negative as a child, had a lot of tendencies to be negative, and she absolutely curved that negativity in a way that I can't even really explain, that I've tried to implement with my own children and don't even know if I'll be able to. But she was a huge part in my outlook on life, right? Like, my ability to look at terrible situations or uncomfortable situations and have somewhat of a positive outlook. Now, I will say one thing that I do not like or deeply disagree with is people who look at terrible situations and pretend like they're not terrible. I am not that person. If something sucks, I am more than willing to say it's uncomfortable or it sucks. Now, does that mean I won't persevere? No, not at all. But I think trying to fool yourself into thinking something is not uncomfortable is not a good way to go about it. Like, conquering uncomfortable mountains can be a really good thing in your life. So that's another thing that she was always very honest with me about. Hey, this might be uncomfortable or not fun, but you're going to persevere. You're going to do it. And so my stepmom was also a huge factor in me becoming a believer. Very knowledgeable woman when it comes to the Bible. My grandmother was the same way, and they taught me a lot about Jesus, but not, I kind of learned who Jesus was on my own, right? So I had a pretty good foundation when it came to growing up. Like, everybody around me is pouring good things into me, but I still wasn't a believer. I still didn't follow Christ. And so one of the biggest factors in me becoming a sure enough follower was my wife and the weight of being a husband. And this completely changed my outlook on life in a lot of different ways. But one of them is that this person is trusting her life to me. And all I knew is that I wasn't enough, is that I wasn't going to be enough to be a good husband for her. And so that really pushed me into searching, right? Now, the way I found Christ is kind of what I want to talk about. And I found Jesus working with other warriors, believers, right? When I went to work with my dad at the cattle company we worked at, watching him day in and day out do good things, make mistakes, the way he reacted when he was angry, all of these things showed me that I was okay, that I wasn't just a total piece of junk, right? That even believers get mad, even believers get frustrated and angry and lash out and do normal things. And I had always put myself in this box as like, I'm too rough around the edges to love Jesus. Like, if he is real, if I should follow him, he wouldn't even want me because I'm not perfect. And so really watching and living life with other warriors in Christ, it totally changed my perspective on this. And we'll do a whole nother episode. We'll say the next episode will be on Ephesians 2. I have a whole tattoo dedicated to Ephesians 2. And reading or listening to that verse for the first time really, really changed my life. And I'll read it on the next podcast, so stay tuned for that. We'll dive into Ephesians 2. But the biggest thing is walking day in and day out with my dad in stressful situations at the cattle company, and the way he reacted was the same way I would, but he was a proclaimed believer, right? A Christ follower, and I wasn't. And maybe outwardly people would look at me and go, "Oh, he's a Christian," but inwardly I was not following Christ at all. And that combined with learning who Jesus actually was. And this is where my problem comes in with the church, is right. So I went to church quite a bit as a kid and still knew nothing about who he was as a man. And maybe that's my fault. Maybe I didn't listen good enough, but I always felt like I was searching okay. But my dad gave me this thing called a Bible stick, and it's this little like MP3 player looking thing, and all it had on it was the Gospels. And they sent it on deployments with soldiers who were deploying overseas, and my granddad had got some, and he gave some to my dad, and my dad gave me one. And so on my hay routes, when I was putting out hay at the cattle company, I would listen to this Bible stick, dude. So I listened to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John over and over and over, and got a really clear picture of who Jesus actually was, because kind of my perspective, or the way that I was looking at Jesus, was like, sure, maybe all this love your brother, turn the cheek, all this other stuff that preachers talk about worked back then, but the world that I live in, if you're candy, you get ran over. And I just wasn't going to be candy. I just wasn't going to be that way. And so as I started listening to the Gospels, you start learning who Jesus actually is, what his character actually is, right? We're not talking about bits and pieces to prove a point, or bits and pieces to match my sermon for the weekend. We're talking about the book through and through, listening to step by step who this dude was. And Jesus was an absolute unit, man. And there's not a man's man on earth that wouldn't follow that guy into the depths of hell and back. I mean, and as I listened and as I learned his character and who he was, I was like, dude, I can follow this guy. I can follow this guy. And he would want me, even in the rough state that I'm in, which I'm still in that state. I'm just further down the road. Anybody who knows me personally knows that I'm pretty rough around the edges in most situations. And so it totally changed my perspective. And I went from, believing that I had to be perfect to follow Jesus, to my imperfections showing his strength, right? My weakness is his strength. And it totally changed my life. And we talk about Ephesians 2 in the next one. That listening to that verse for the first time, my dad actually read it to me in his living room. I can remember it like it was yesterday. It completely changed my entire perspective. So basically my background, as far as becoming a believer, came from walking day in and day out with other men who loved Jesus, and then learning who he actually was. And so I believe, or my hope for this podcast, is that the men out there that need somebody to walk with can come walk with me. And our hope for 310 at one point was for this, and it has not turned into that, right? I would love to be able to come work with you guys individually and walk day in and day out doctoring cattle, or doing whatever there is to do there on your place, but that's just not feasible for me anymore. And we're going to kind of talk about that. The suffering that I endure on a daily basis is it's unfortunate. And the reason why I live where I live now, and the things that I do now, opposed to doctoring yearlings every day, that's why. And the only way that I've been able to cope with that is knowing that I'm a son of the King, that he gave me the illness that I have for a reason, and the things that I have to carry, the cross to bear, so to speak, the thorn in my side, so to speak, it's mine to carry. And for whatever reason, Christ has asked me to do that. And so this podcast is my attempt to be able to walk day in and day out with you guys in a way that that you can come to know him. Because you're going to suffer. That's a fact, whether you know him or not. But what I do know is that if you don't know him, the suffering will be far worse. And if you do know him, the suffering means something. And it will change your life completely. So with that being said, I'm going to talk a little bit about how suffering has changed my life. So about 4 years ago, I got diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder called psoriatic arthritis. And so most of you have probably heard of psoriasis, which is a skin disorder, and you get these nasty, it's not really a rash, it's like a plaque psoriasis. It just looks like a scab kind of, but it itches like a son of a gun. It's super annoying. And 30% of people who get the psoriasis end up with psoriatic arthritis. Psoriatic arthritis is arthritis of the small joints. So you're talking hands, you're talking feet, lower back. Some people have it in their neck, in their shoulders, right? You'll get it in your spine kind of on the low side and then the top side. I haven't had anything in the middle yet. So when I got diagnosed with this, well, basically, I'll take you back to the beginning. So I was Dr. Neerlands, and I was probably 26 years old, in great shape, so to speak. I worked on a ranch, on a backgrounding yard, so to speak, or not so to speak, on a backgrounding yard. So all we really did was ride health. So I was on a horse, 8, 12 hours a day, doctoring cattle or pushing up or gathering or whatever. And my back went out. Never had any back troubles before this. Was really odd. So I basically rode back to my truck on my horse, got off my horse, and crawled on my hands and knees into my truck because I could not walk. And I was like, what in the hell is going on? So I go to the doctor. They take x-rays, and this doctor comes in, bro's weighing like 350, and tells me that my back's weak and that I'm not in good enough shape. And I was like, listen, man, I know for a fact that's not the issue. You don't do what we do every day and have a weak back. There's something wrong with me. I cannot walk, and I'm 26 years old. So I took like 2 weeks off, laid up in the couch, couldn't hardly move. And it got better and kind of went away. And I continued working and doing everything I was doing, and about a year later, my left foot got swollen, like 3 times the size it was supposed to be. I was like, what in the heck is going on? And then I had this little patch of psoriasis on my knee. Well, my wife was an ICU nurse at the time, and she started looking up all the symptoms, and she was like, this is psoriatic arthritis. I was like, there's no freaking way. I have arthritis. I'm 26 years old. What, are you kidding me? And so I go to a rheumatologist because she worked at the hospital, so they got me in pretty quick, and go to the rheumatologist, and the doctor is like, this is most certainly psoriatic arthritis. If you don't take care of yourself, you're going to be crippled before you're 50 years old. And I was like, dude, you got to be kidding me. So that kind of started my suffering. There was things that happened to me as a younger man that I would count as not great things, but I can look at almost everything that's ever happened in my life up to this point and declare a reason for it, right? It was either my own stupidity or God was working on me or whatever the case may be. But the fact of the matter is that this is the first time in my life that I had been confronted with something that's going to be great and terrible suffering that's never going to go away. And I got on medication there for a little while I had insurance through the military, and it was okay. It kind of knocked the edge off of it, and then I had another rheumatologist put me on some stronger stuff, and there were some pretty terrible side effects to that medication. So since then I've gotten off the medication. We don't have health insurance anymore because of the nature of our business, and I got out of the military, and so I can't afford to pay for the medication that they would graduate me to next, right? And this created a really terrible relationship for me and doctors. I was like, dude, like this stuff is almost worse than the arthritis, right? Like the medication they're giving me is not only not curing it, because there's no cure for psoriatic arthritis, but there's other terrible side effects that are happening, and by the time I'm 50 years old, I'm going to be crippled from the medication anyway. And so all the research I ever did on psoriatic arthritis, all of the things that would happen to you over time had to do with gaining weight, right? Because your joints hurt all the time, so you quit being active and you get fat. And when you get fat, other bad things happen. And so I made it a point in my brain, was like, okay, I just need to keep going to the gym. So really, the biggest thing that's helped my psoriatic arthritis has been staying in the gym, staying really active and trying to take care of myself in that way. Not that it is not wildly uncomfortable to go to the gym because your joints are swollen and hurt all the time. It's one of those things that gives you a weapon against it, right? It's a way to fight the arthritis. And so through this suffering, I have learned so much about myself, and I've cowboyed with it. And I now have had to kind of step back from that life a little bit, just because my body, quite frankly, can't handle it at this time. And so I do more of my work here at home remote. You know, I edit a lot of video of Dad or Abby or the other cowhands they get to go work with. But that's kind of why, right? That you guys haven't seen me in the videos. And I've been grinding in my head, grinding away to still make content for everybody who loves our YouTube channel, so that we're still offering something out there, you know, for you guys to watch or listen to, something to enrich your lives in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And so that's where the art of suffering came from. Daily suffering is a part of life, and it's what makes us Christ-like, unfortunately. But that's a fact. That's what Philippians 3:10 says. So with all that being said, I've had to give up what I'm supposed to be, so to speak, right? Like, there's nothing cooler to me on earth than being a cowhand. And that job is the coolest job ever. But what I've been called to suffer with, it has pulled me away from this for a multitude of reasons. But one being, it's wildly uncomfortable to do the job. And I just can't do it at the level that I used to. And so I've had to find my identity in Christ, and not in being a cowhand or being a husband or how much I can lift at the gym, right? Because all of those things have been stripped away from me. To the point in which there's days that quite frankly, the only thing I have in my mind is to be a warrior for the King. Spiritually, mentally, emotionally, like having a good attitude, suffering well for my family, right? Not complaining, and just trying to be a good role model for my sons. And through the suffering, it has created an environment where I've become wildly empathetic towards other people who suffer on a daily basis. Like, used to, you'd look at another guy that's having a hard time or whatever and be like, freaking suck it up, bro. Get after it, you know? And while I do have that mentality in most situations, I also have this deep empathetic feeling for anyone who is suffering on a daily basis. And it doesn't matter with what. Because just because your suffering isn't like my suffering doesn't mean it's not suffering. And I think looking at everything from other people's point of views allows us to do two things. One, be empathetic, and two, learn from it, right? There's been many men in my life that I have learned and watched suffer deeply, and have been able to emulate that through my suffering. I'll also say that finding joy in life is a choice. Choosing to look at things with a joyful heart is not something that just happens. This is some days a minute-by-minute decision. Other days, you can wake up happy and just have a great day. But choosing joy, choosing to be thankful for the things that we do have and the things that God has blessed us with is transformative. And it will change the people around you. It will change you. And over time, you will become more hardened to the suffering. Iron sharpens iron, man. And I'm here to try to give you a glimpse into my life. My hope is to have guests on this podcast, and we talk about their suffering and the lessons they've learned from these things. Not just from the cowboy world. While cowboys are pretty dang good at suffering, from all walks of life, I would love to have discussions about the things that they find helpful through their suffering, and the things their spouses do, or the things their children do, or the parts of life that they truly enjoy, and how they can still be happy and be suffering on a daily basis. I want to say that I truly appreciate you guys for watching 310 Ranch Life's YouTube channel, for following us on here, and I appreciate all of the people who support our business and buy our ropes. And my hope is through this podcast I can connect with you guys on a totally different platform in a totally different way, and that in some weird shape, form, or fashion I can help you along in life, because that's always kind of been our goal, is to share Philippians 3:10 with the world, so that anyone who doesn't know their purpose does know their purpose, and that suffering is a part of life and we're all suffering together. I truly appreciate you guys listening. The next episode we'll talk about Ephesians 2 and how that verse changed my life. If you haven't read it, go read it right now. Hopefully I'll have some people reach out and we can do some guest talks on here with anybody who wants to. I think it'll be a lot of fun, and I'm sure excited about the opportunity. Thanks for watching.